Welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to What's the Point? Not surprisingly, I've got another fabulous guest today. Joe Dixon is a retired partner of Boston Consulting Group. BCG is one of the world's most prominent consulting groups. There's a lot that he did in that organization that we'll talk about, not the least of which is leading BCG North America, starting their DC office and such. But beyond that, Joe is also now a published author. And if you're looking at YouTube, here's his book. It's called The Generous Leader. And I would submit that now, as much as any time in our past, we need a generous leader. Joe, good morning. Welcome. And thank you for being here.
Morning, Bill. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
It is good to talk. We've Joe and I have had some technical difficulties getting this to happen. So at long last,
that's all in the past, Bill. All in the
past.
It
is, and it's all learning. And again, you have been very generous in your patience and understanding. So I appreciate that. But let's start right there, because generous is a very interesting word. How do you define generous?
Yeah, in this context, because of course it could be defined in many different ways, or the context can be different. What I really mean, and you just commented that you think the time is even more right for this type of leadership, is that a generous leader is one who gives of themselves freely, without expectation of direct personal benefit, to enable others to develop, grow, and thrive at their full potential. That's, you see report after report about people working in wherever they're working, and they want to drive to their full potential. Quite frankly, I have 8 grandchildren. They play soccer, a number of them. They want to be the best soccer player they can be.
Yeah.
It's the same for a coach as it is for a leader. I will make one comment too. I said that, without expectation of direct personal benefit. But the truth is, if you've got, that's kind of a duh, right? But if you have your team thriving at their full potential, you're probably going to have a pretty high performing team. And you're therefore going to benefit as a leader of that organization.
I'm glad you made that clarification, Joe, because I was going to ask you exactly that. It can, I believe, easily be misunderstood that if you're a generous leader, as you just defined, you're putting all of the recognition and all of the accolades for accomplishing things on your team. But how does it come back to you as a leader to show that the team performed that well because of your leadership style?
Yeah, well, no, I agree with that. It's just, of course, as you just implied, as a leader, you, your team, your organization, whatever it is, has to get results. Otherwise, you will lose your job. That's just a given. I'm sure you'll lose it. So I'm not saying that it's only being nice, only being a servant leader that doesn't strive to, but I do believe deeply, and I'll tell a little story. I do believe deeply that the best leaders ensure that people perform the best, the team performs. I almost am quite confident that the bosses, whatever that is, will understand that somehow you're leading that team very well. You get a hell of a lot of the credit. When I moved to the West Coast, take over our West Coast business at BCG before I became head of North America, and it was performed well. This consulting firm performed well, but it didn't perform as well as it should have over 50 years. Quite frankly, it made a big turn during my time. And it was funny because the executive committee at BCG or the compensation committee after maybe the second year said, wow, Joe, it's not just that you are doing well and the West Coast, but every single person, every partner on the West Coast performing at a whole different level. It was actually to me, it just reinforced the idea that, at least at my firm, they recognize, wow, you rose everybody's level and that's what they complimented me on, not the overall, because that's what might last, right? You could have a couple good years, may or may not last. When people perform at a different level, you build much more long-term successful organization.
That's a great observation. So you moved to the West Coast and it was performing well, but ended up performing better with virtually everyone rising in their performance. How do you instill your style of generous leadership, and how long does it take for that to be seated amongst that whole new area that you were in?
Yeah. So, yeah, you said virtually everyone, but I mean, I had to think about to say this. I mean, first off, people have to understand it's about getting a result.
Mhm.
That's number one. And I will say, typically, I don't know if this is public or not, but BCG partner turnover, some years it's 0 to 2%, 6 to 8 is kind of normal. My first year on the West Coast, the partner turnover was 17%. Second year was 12%. So there were people who were underperforming, but no matter how generous I was as a leader, they were not going. They had to go do something else, which is fine. So it's not all about just being sweet and being nice and taking somebody that doesn't belong in that role and somehow making them, if they have capabilities for that role, it is your job to get them to be a performer. But so that's the first thing I'd say. It's not only be nice. The second thing, though, even with that comment I just made about having to drive turnover, you care deeply about the person. They aren't going to be so upset anyway. I mean, these people, I'll tell a story. One guy said to me, he was a high-performing person in a different country. He came to the United States, he was underperforming. I think part of it is English was very good, but nuances he missed. That's fixing a client service. This is where you're talking to people. And I knew he was stressed over this. And I can just tell. One day I said, you have three choices. You go home, you can quit, or I can fire you. But one of those three, and he had underperformed for 3 years. I said, one of those three can happen. He said, well, thank you, Joe. You're right. I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm going home. He was very stressed about thinking about it anyway. And the fact that I cared enough to help him go to the right situation. And people say, how could you say that so directly? How could you be so harsh? I said, it wasn't harsh. It was what he was sitting there losing sleep over every night. I just released it. So to your question, you've got to drive results. You got to make sure you have the best people and don't kid yourself. And then I think when you really truly care about others and helping them grow, giving them opportunities, I could go into details. But I used to say at BCG, well, all I did was unleash the talent of a incredible set of people that just was somehow being held back. And some of my colleagues didn't understand. I said, well, that you just unleashed up. But that's, a place like BCG, which is a people business, obviously, and ideas, but people create ideas. It's so critical.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. And just to clarify, when you said you can go home, quit, or get fired, you meant go home to his original country.
Yeah, go back to
where he was comfortable, where he performed very well and fit in. Because I was going to say earlier, it is a form of generosity to point out to people, this is not the best place for you to be spending your work life. It can be difficult. It can be hard to take. It can be considered harsh. But at the end of the day, it might very well be one of the kindest, most generous things a leader can do if it's done in a kind and caring and generous way.
Yeah, respectful. And to your point, caring. Well, of course, if you really parse my words, I said thrive at your full potential. So if somebody is a podcast host and is really nobody's listening and it's not working, doesn't somebody owe it, maybe the person's husband or wife or partner or friend, owe it to them to call and say, this isn't working? Go do something at which you can thrive.
Yeah.
So people sometimes lose track. They think servant leadership, heart-led leadership, generous leadership means you're only sweet all the time. No, it means you care and you push people the opportunity to be the best they can be. That may or may not be with you, or may not be in the role they're in. And usually pushing, I had a mentor. He's now CEO of FTI, Steve Gumby. He was a tough guy, or he is a tough guy, but it's all because he wanted you to be better every day. Well, he wanted to get results, but he wanted you to be better. And if you could understand that's what he was driving, it was incredible because you just got better. It was sometimes painful, painful is a tough word, but sometimes it was uncomfortable, but it was all about you being better.
And painful is a fair word in a lot of instances.
Yes.
But what you just said puts me as a big sports fan in mind of some of the greatest coaches ever. And I think of Vince Lombardi, I think of Bill Parcells, two of the greatest football coaches. They were very direct. They had the best end. They were focused on results. And they wanted their team and their team members to perform at their best to achieve those results. And I don't know how gently or kindly they were to cut people that weren't performing. But what you're talking about is what they showed. Thank you for explaining your definition of generous in this context. before we combine the two, let me ask you to share some of your thoughts on what defines a good leader. What is good leadership? And then in a second, I'm going to ask you to put them all together and get into some of the 7 elements of your book.
Yeah, to figure out where to start. But I do think a good leader is one who understands he or she are trying to drive to better outcomes, whatever they're doing. They understand that they singly do not do it. They do it with their team, with their organization, whatever that be. And their job is, of course, to create the strategy and the vision, probably with other people. Their job is to set metrics and targets and monitor and drive that, because people need that. But their job, I think, really exceptionally is that middle part, which is ensure their team is set up and capable to help drive that strategy under those metrics to the best outcome. And that's the part I think sometimes it's hardest for people. I mean, you said the word direct. Some people indirect, they're being mean. Well, no, maybe direct, they're actually being quite nice. You know what we know about that? I think that's the part that sometimes people miss in the middle. It's all about ensuring, now I'm repeating myself, but ensuring your team helps you work against those metrics, drive it against that vision or strategy or whatever it might be. Now, it's your job to motivate, to get them there, come up with clever slogans to inspire people. You know, there's a lot of elements and there's a lot of books written about good management. Yeah. And I think I'm talking more about leadership than management. If one is a pretty good lead manager, it's tricky to be a good leader because eventually people say, well, I get it, but where are we going or how are we getting there? I've lost. Doesn't work, you know, even if you're leading from your heart all the time.
Yeah. So a couple of observations or one observation and then a comment. What you said about being direct can be the kindest thing. And again, just to bring back what you said even earlier, Joe, is it's a matter of how it's delivered. So I always use the example of honesty. People talk about brutal honesty. Honesty doesn't have to be brutal. Rigorous honesty is a much better way of going about it, where you're being honest, but you're not being brutal about it. And I think that's applicable to what you talked about of directness to people that need to be informed in a direct way.
Yeah.
The other thing is just an aside. I read just this morning an article on LinkedIn about the difference between being a leader and a boss. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, because it's real easy to be a boss, I think. You may not get results, you may not be successful, but barking orders, telling people what to do is not necessarily that hard if you've got that in you. Being a leader and understanding where are we going, how you can inspire and motivate people to get there, whatever that means, and then how you're going to help people grow to help you get there. A whole different concept than being a boss. I don't know what the article said, but I think you could even say you could be a boss, which could be almost, you could be a manager, which may or may not be a boss, and probably get a lot better outcomes than a boss unless you're a genius and just yell at everybody on how it all works. And then put it all together with leadership. You know, it's interesting on that comment. I was thinking as I worked on this book, not to talk about the book too much, but, you know, if you're a new manager and you have 3 people, you can be a boss or you can be whatever you want, because if they can't get it done, you could do it yourself. You know, you might have to stay up all night, but you could probably do what 3 people. But the minute you're 30 people, 50 people, or you become a CEO, you understand this is now about not just, what is a CEO? I won't go into that, but you know, they don't make that many, they can't do that much. They just point direction and motivate people to get there. It's now about leadership. Which sometimes over the years I'd watch, well, how come that person got the CEO job, not that person? You know, when I was younger, and I could never understand it. But there's something about leadership versus just management or boss.
Well, I assure you that I wish I had the insights of the difference between being a boss and a leader years and years and years ago.
Oh, we all do.
Yeah, that would have been one great
That's
one
why
to learn early.
I hope some 40-year-olds or 28 or 35-year-olds listen to me and say, listen, I just think, wait, now it's time for me to start stepping up into leadership. Even now, even if it's a small team you have,
Well, that's a great point because, excuse me, we're all leaders. We can all be leaders. It has nothing to do, it has some to do, but separate from any designated position, we can all be leaders in some way, shape, or form. We can lead by our actions. We can lead by doing doing things in such a way that it's an attraction to others to try to do what you're doing, being someone that gives an example. So a leader can be someone as at the lowest position in any company or any organization. It's not just someone that's a designated leader.
Well, when you said that, of course, you and I both know. I mean, as a parent, you're supposed to be leading, right? And you know damn well children ain't listening to the words you're saying. They're watching what you do. Mm-hmm. My daughter, one of my oldest daughters, just did homework all the time. She worked and worked. And Sarah and I, my wife, said, Sadie, you don't have to work that hard. And she looked and said, well, Dad, you work all the time. She had 4 kids. She was on boards and all. Mom works all the time. So why wouldn't I work all the time? So I just, never mind, work all the time. I'm not changing my behavior. So I just agreed. Go ahead and do that homework. What was I going to say?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, good for her.
Yeah, I know. She called me up.
So you said you don't want to spend a lot of time in your book. Well, I want to spend a lot of time
I don't
in
mind.
your book. So I hope you're okay with that because the full title is The Generous Leader, 7 Ways to Give of Yourself for Everyone's Gain. And the 7 elements, I can go through them, but better for you to go through them, if you will.
So I talk about, I might bounce around in the order, but I talk about 1, connecting with people, connecting with your team in personal, and personally connecting with your teams in ways that matter to them, which became so obvious during, the pandemic. Number 2, which I think is so important, is really listening to others and listening to learn. What do you know, Bill, that I don't know? And I want to hear what you're saying and put that together, not just assume I know what I'm thinking. I think I'm underpinning that is what I call, the importance of vulnerability or humbleness or being authentic or being real. I don't think you actually can be a great listener if you're not humble enough to understand you don't know everything. We talked about recognition of feedback, a big believer in direct. We talked honest, non-mush feedback, but it has to come from caring. We'll talk more about that. I think it's quite important for a good leader to be ally. And in my book, I do mean an ally in the sense of helping people who don't have the same opportunities. Maybe a controversial sentence today, but I believe that. But also ally could be a mentor, of course. Mm-hmm. And then another thing that I thought was quite powerful is small acts have big impact. And we can tell stories about that. We all remember if you got a star on the top of your kindergarten paper. It was pretty easy for the kindergarten teacher to put up there. You were really excited, right? It was a big deal. So small acts, if nothing else, congratulating people on a job well done, thanking people, job well done, goes a long way towards motivating and inspiring.
So vulnerability, talk to me about vulnerability. Help us understand what you mean by that and help me to understand how that can work in some of the more driven, competitive, cutthroat type corporate and business situation. It doesn't have to be a corporation, by the way, to be cutthroat, but how does vulnerability work and help us survive?
Yes. So, this is in the context of leadership, of course. I actually believe if someone is always perfect, and just think over your life, someone who they acted perfect. They never disclosed anything, any failures, any things that go sideways. People struggle to follow that person because they can't be that person. Or they can say, wait a minute, this can't be real. So there's something dishonest here, which also is a problem. So when I say vulnerable, authentic, I just mean you got to bring some of your true self, your human self, and show your human self in the work environment. I'll tell a little story because I also think actually if you can be vulnerable, show you don't always know the answer, it actually frees others to move past their roadblocks. And at a colleague, I asked him about his vulnerability, any vulnerability he had. And he said, well, Joe, I used to be afraid to say, I don't know. I always thought, I don't know. I know you're trained not to say, I don't know, but as you grow in business, you're supposed to say, I don't know if you don't have the answer. Bullshitting eventually gets you caught if you're in a good organization. So he said, I wouldn't say, I don't know. So if he's working with the team and he could see they're getting stuck, he would leave the room before they could turn to him and ask him, what should we do? And he said, one time, he said, this is a waste of time. I mean, he walks out, now they're stuck for longer. And he stayed there. They asked, of course. And he said, well, I don't know either. He said, it was like a burst of energy came through. Wow, you don't know either? The boss doesn't help. None of us know. And the creative energies just started flowing. So, vulnerability doesn't mean crying in front. It can of a 400 person Zoom call or something, or 4,000. Vulnerability can be as simple as saying, I don't know, showing your human self, and then freeing others to say, oh, it's okay not to know. And that's the leadership trick. You're actually being quite generous, right? It's okay not to know. Now let's work together to solve it. And I can tell more stories, but that's to me. Now I hear you, and I don't know what cutthroat has to do with it. Cutthroat doesn't matter. If you bullshit and say, a cutthroat place is going to sort that out and they're going to come and get you. If you say, I don't know.
No, what I meant was there is the opportunity, and I've experienced this, where people can take your vulnerability and twist it and go and kind of damage your name in that regard. But like you said, if you're saying you don't know, and the next thing you do is try to figure out the answer and work in such a way to figure out the answer, that whole thing kind of goes up in smoke. Years ago, I worked for Anheuser-Busch, and every year we'd have marketing plans, and there'd be a whole room of executives, but in particular, it was Mr. Bush sitting in the middle, and you knew who your audience was, and you've been in those situations. And he would very often ask questions that he knew the answer to, and he wanted to see the reaction. And I saw people do three things: give the correct answer, bullshit an answer, or say, I don't know. But everyone that said, I don't know, said, but I will have that answer for you in whatever time frame. And the ones that were bullshitting, I didn't see the next year. So,
well, that's also, yeah. I mean, we could go in, well, anyway, no, you just said it. Being vulnerable is not, it's just sharing honest and authenticity. And I think, I was where I was going to go with that, though, is you told a good story, because also there's listening in there. Some people just don't listen to the boss and say, well, why are they asking this question? And being humble enough or authentic enough, say, hey, I'm not quite sure what he's asking. I better ask back and show the weakness. I once had a client. Is that right? Do you hear like birds? Is it?
Yeah, there's some type of noise coming through. I don't know what it is or where it's coming from.
I don't have anything on my side. Okay. It almost sounds like birds in the background. You know what I mean? Oh, just way away.
Yeah, it's gone. It was up a little bit earlier, and just for being transparent to the listeners, I don't know what it is. And I think it's just a continuation of some of the technical difficulties you and I have had that you and I haven't had with anyone else. So hopefully it's not too intrusive, because your comment and your content is very sound and very enlightening, and hopefully people are taking notes and listening, and hopefully people are considering going out and buying the book, The Generous Leader, to get more info on those 7 steps. I talked at the beginning, you talked just a moment ago. What you deliver in this book seems to be very contrary to the current attitude, at least in the U.S. My belief is we need more of this rather than less of this. What is your perspective on how this is going to play out? The generous leader philosophy versus the more exclusionary philosophy, I'll call it.
Bill, that's a big question. It could go a lot of ways, but let me just try to.
That's why I asked you and didn't try to answer it.
I'm going to answer it carefully. No, in the context of being a leader and working and all that, I actually so deeply believe that the best leaders, your word versus manager and bosses, actually display the kind of behavior that inspires and motivates and develops and grows people. That's the people that rise. Now, I'll be a little more direct. I had one guy say to me, okay, Joe, but what about, all these tech titans who don't seem to be this kind of. So yeah, they were all technical geniuses, I think. And they got themselves to a place where they're so money powerful that they can behave differently. Sure. But I have a lot of friends who have kids who worked at Facebook for like 1 to 2 years and couldn't wait to get out. So I'm not sure. Now, maybe it thus works because the idea is good enough, but it'll have its day. Or use a counter as Satya Nadella, who turned around Microsoft, also a technical. Yes. But he changed the culture. He changed the way they behave. He changed the decision making. That's what changed Microsoft, not the fact that he was a technical genius. So I hear you in these times. I think, and maybe there's some bullies out there, and the bullies will have their day. But I don't think you, as a manager or leader in an organization, whoever you be, can bully and scream and yell and all that and get yourself into a good place. Your team's not going to get there. You're not getting promoted, etc. Unless you have to have created Facebook and you're a genius and all that. Then you can go do your thing.
Yeah.
There's like 2 of those people, right? Or 4 or something.
Well, again, this podcast is not about me, but I could give you specific examples of how that doesn't work based on my past performance. So let's talk about, for a minute, Joe, how you got to the Boston Consulting group, because a couple of things. I'm curious. I know you went through Whitman College and you're still involved there, but I also believe there's a story when you were on your way to open the DC office where you really had a real world example of generous leadership. Can you talk about that?
Well, that was quite, I was at BCG, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years. And my mentor, the one I talked about, Steve, he and I, he was going down to Open Washington. I was going along to co-found it with him, although I was part junior. And we were flying back, I think. We were flying up to a client in Canada. I said, Joe, I need to tell you something. Oh, we're sitting next to each other. I know exactly where we're sitting on the plane. I said, okay. He said, well, I've got a job offer to be president of the company. And my head goes, oh, shit. Because literally, I'd already moved my wife, 2 of my children. He was going to follow and move in December. I'd moved to get to school. But what the hell? I just moved my town, which it's not the end of the world, but I did sell my house, buy a new house. But I said, oh, great. I thought a lot of swear words. And he said, don't worry, Joe. There's a lot of puts and takes, but I'm not going to do that. I can't do that to you and Sarah. You've already moved your family. Now, when I recounted this to him 25 years later, he said, well, no, that's right. I wasn't. But there were other things in my head too, Joe. But that's what I heard. And I was blown away because there is an example of somebody. He is very exceptional. He was at BCG and he is where he's now. Somebody who didn't have to worry 2 hoots about me. And if he had a great opportunity, now if it was incredible, he might have taken it. I don't know. But it was really I think I was my 4th year at BCG. It was quite a lesson to me. Really sticking with your people. I was known at BCG to say, I have your back. Whose back do you have? And it was all built on that guy, that moment, that person had my back and my wife and my children. It was very powerful.
It sure seems to be. Another lesson from that I find is I'm always fascinated, certainly in my own mind, we hear one sentence or one comment in a matter of nanoseconds. We can paint and write an entire story, and often it's a story of disaster or doom or worst case. And sometimes taking a breath allows the rest of the story to come through. And that speaks to why it's important to be a good listener. Yeah. It's important to listen to the full comment, full story, full point someone is attempting to make before we get to the point of wanting to just come up with our own interpretation. So, I've been in those situations. I know people who have been in those situations, and it's very, very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, no, you comment on the list. No, you're right. If I reflect, there's 2 points in there. Of course, I reflected on a lot of things in a nanosecond, but slow down enough to ask questions and listen. And I also have to be, and just go back to the humble enough to think, whatever you just assumed, Joe, may or may not be in his head. Who are you to, that's all about you all of a sudden.
Yeah.
We could go into Buddhism if we wanted to, but it's not all about you. It's about how you interpret the world around you. Yeah, on this listening thing, Google did a survey of Project Oxygen, they called it, 80,000 of their managers, and then identified what were the highest performing and condition criteria, what underpinned the best performers. And they said they were excellent coaches. And then when they dug deeper with their teams, they engaged their team. But when they were dug deeper, they asked and they listened. The best perform. Now, 80,000 examples, but they asked and listened. They asked and listened. And your point is the important one, which is listen. It's very easy to hear word, but that may not be listen. Why are they saying what they're saying? You you said your story about Bush. I was on this client where he was telling the president, he was going to presentation, he's a supply chain guy, right down this path, and the CEO came in with a question that way. He looked over at him. You could tell him, thinking, well, that has nothing to do with my presentation. Kind of gave some bullshit answer and then kept on going. And you could see the CEO's eyes glaze over. He didn't listen to another word. And the guy didn't even have the courtesy to say, sorry, boss, I'm talking about this. What's your question? What do you need to, didn't have the courtesy to stop and ask, why are you asking this? Or, and that cost him. It cost him in that second. Needless to say, he never did get promoted either.
Yeah, it does have consequences, doesn't it? Let me go back to what I referenced just a second ago. Let's kind of get to your starting point a little bit. Your life and getting to Whitman College. Did you ever foresee yourself being the executive that you became? What were your dreams as a child? How did you see yourself in your future?
Dreams of the child. Oh my gosh. Well, several answers. I did find a bucket list that I had written, if you want to call it that, or life's goals. I written when I was 13. I found it in my scrapbook. I had to create my own scrapbook. My parents were divorced. My mom wasn't much in the scrapbooks. She was working all the time to keep us going. And I found this thing, and there was a number of goals on there. And one was to be, I didn't say CEO. I said lead a company because, I was clever enough. You say CEO, that's a hard role to get. But if you say lead something, but I also talked about, so that was a goal. I did say in there, be a great man. But I define great man as having a solid marriage, wonderful children, and wonderful I defined as happy, successful, but it was amazingly thoughtful. So I think even those days, sure, I think wanted to be in business. I don't know why. I wanted to run something, probably to prove to when my parents got divorced from them, I said, when are we going home? We were my grandparents. Well, your dad and I aren't living with each other anymore. And I was shocked. And I was angry with her. And of course, also angry with me. Thinking as any 8-year-old, just how you did something. So I think I spent many years of my life trying to prove that it was pretty damn good to my mother. And she was the kind of mom who all said, I used to say, I want to be the president of the United States. She goes, oh, well, don't say that, Joey. You can never be that. Which is true. Except don't say it that way. Say, oh, that's a nice aspiration. Well, maybe, I was only 5 or 8 or 10. So I said, she died when I was 30. And finally, my wife said, Joe, maybe now. And I got into BCG. I got one, at least leading something. So maybe you now can just let it go. You're doing it at the Harvard Business School. So anyway, I don't know all the twists and turns. I mean, I went to Whitman. I wanted to go to small liberal arts school. I did always want to go to or to business school for sure, and HBS was this little, dream. And I only applied to HBS and Northwestern and got into both. And HBS is what I had never heard of consulting firms.
Yeah. Excuse me just for a second. For our listeners, HBS is Harvard Business School.
I'm sorry. Harvard. Yeah.
Which is kind of significant.
Yeah.
So you'd never heard of consulting?
I never heard of consulting, but now you got me talking about me too much here. But at Harvard, they have all the consulting firms. It might have changed a little bit, and the investment banks come on a Saturday, Black Saturday, they call it. They interview anyone that signs up. So I had 12 interviews on this Black Saturday. Consulting firms, investment bankers. So it's funny stories. Like the third interview, I think it was an investment banker, and I was going with the lady, and this lady looks up, 10 minutes and goes, "Are you really interested in being a banker?" I said, "No." She goes, "Well, it shows." I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." Kept the interview going like 5 more minutes. Excuse me, and I canceled the rest of those interviews. I thought it's that obvious, huh? And then, I don't know, just a little bit of luck. Of course, there's a lot of luck. They interview a whole bunch of people in one day. It's a funny thing because then Saturday night you get callbacks with Sunday's final round. Sunday night you get an offer or not. Monday morning in the classroom, no one talks to each other because you don't know if anyone else got a job and you don't want to be the guy that.
Yeah.
But that landed me at BCG for a summer job, and the rest. Although I'll tell you, now 2 stories. One, I had a professor at HBS at Harvard Business School who said, "Oh, you got into BCG? Well, you'll never survive there. You're not smart enough." Which was a little version of my mom's thing. Here's another. I'm a little bit motivated by kind of like, really, really.
I'll show you.
I'll show you. Yeah.
Yeah.
We also had at the end of the summer when the partner gave me the offer. He said, well, you'll do really well here, Joe, because you actually, they were very intellectual. BCG is very intellectual. This 40 years ago, very intellectual. He said, you actually, a little bit, you don't use such big words all the time, is how he put it, something less direct. And well, that's a compliment and a put down, but that's all right. I'll take the compliments. But it was all about connecting with people. And, and consulting was beginning to change then, and not just be brilliant strategies on a PowerPoint slide deck. I'm someone to say, yes, it's still that, that are left behind. But companies are starting to say, hey, well, help us get it done, which you have to connect with, which I think is why I had, probably a lot of reasons, my special sauce or superpowers, here nowadays, was the ability to connect.
Being relatable.
Yeah.
It makes all the difference in the world. So you just opened up to the final area. This isn't the point of no return, but this is something I wanted to get to because I find it really fascinating. And I believe a lot of the listeners would be curious as to what consulting means and what consulting does. So a couple of things before I let you answer that. Yeah, you said it's changing, so I want to hear about that. But I've also heard quite a bit that consultants come in, analyze, give you a nice report of what to do, and you put a binder on the shelf and you never see the consultant again. Clarify all of that and help educate all of us to what consulting truly is, because if it were just that, it wouldn't be as big and important as it is.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So a little bit of context quickly. There's lots of types of consulting, right? I live in the BCG or my competitor McKinsey or Bain world, which tend to be strategy / management. So there's also just individuals who help consult other individuals, coaching, advising. And then there's the big four, Accenture, Deloitte, and these guys who do a lot more hands-on work, but they also do strategy. I don't want to encourage them. So in my world, this is what I said, it changed. When I started BCG, I used to call it Seagull Consulting. So very smart people would get a question typically from the CEO, should we open in China or not, kind of thing. So is the market big enough? Although you do all this analysis and write a PowerPoint slide deck and fly by and drop it on the table and keep on flying.
Right.
To be harsh about my industry. But that no one asked in those days for help. The CEO wanted that. Either they wanted it because they wanted to rubber stamp what they believe, or they really wanted to get an answer and execute on it. That varied by the client. The change started probably about 30 years ago where clients said, okay, this is fine, but now you got to help us do it. And we got to get it done. And now all of a sudden it changed the consulting. It wasn't just study. Now you had to be relatable. You had to be able to think about how organizations work, and the capability is broadened quite a bit. Now, I'll tell you what you say, at least a place like BCG, part of it is, senior people who know the industry well and a bunch of less senior people who are really smart and who work all the time. And let me tell you, when I helped bring Super Bowl 50 to San Francisco, and Daniel Lurie, now the mayor, he was the head of the bid committee. And we all volunteered to help. It's cooled out. He said, well, what are you guys going to do for me? What does BCG know about football? I said, Daniel, you're going to get a bunch of 25 to 30-year-olds who love football, who will work all the time on any question you want. Mm-hmm. All right. Because I did it for free. And like a month in, he said, holy crap, I didn't realize you were serious. It's so incredible. So that's what it is. Highly energized, motivated, not always people. Now and I think they are putting so much energy and, effort and thinking into whatever question is being asked, that they get to a deeper insight than the client might, only because the client has a day job, not the client. Well, maybe it's more than that, but they have a day job. They took a team of their best people and did the same thing. Now there are, now sometimes consultant clients just want a consultant know to read the watch and read it back and say, yeah, the watch is right. That's fine. I mean, that's it. I think the other thing consulting does do is help communicate things very clearly. I mean, I've had clients over the years say, geez, you're just saying what I'm saying. I'm saying, yeah, but I can help say it to the board and the C-suite the way you are able to say it. So take it back. Either they get negative and turn on you, or they say, well, hell, then be my conduit. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's striving to deep insight with a hell of a lot of effort and time focused on your problem, your thing, not problem. But along the way, I'm not going to BS you. There's a little bit of reading to watch, but there's also massive communication abilities. Clients won't always.
The one thing you didn't mention, but I think you'll agree with, in my experience, another benefit to consulting, be it a major consulting firm or individual consultants like I do, consulting and coaching, is an independent viewpoint. So you have someone from outside that organization that doesn't have the blinders on, doesn't have the bumper guards on the bowling alley, doesn't have all the limitations, which sometimes affect where the strategy and the thinking can go. But I think that independent perspective is really essential for legitimate and effective consulting.
Yes, independent, and to your point, the outside point of view. They're not
Right.
Whatever we think the right answer is what you're going to hear, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you might fire us over it, but you sure as hell won't rehire us if we give you, garbage. Or just say back what you want to hear.
Yeah, I was going to say, depending on what that advice is, that might be why you never see the consultant again. We didn't like that.
You may get fired, but I'm telling you.
Hey, Joe, thank you so much for your time, not just for today, but for your generosity and patience and grace with all the issues that we had getting to this point. But before we go, the question that every guest on my show is asked, and again, you can put this in whatever context you choose to put it in. Joe, what's the point?
What's the point? The point is helping those around you to grow and be the best they can. So if you're a dad, your children, or a mom, but it's your children. For me now, I have 8 grandchildren, number 9 coming. My point, I really see this more and more, is about them being as, happy as they can be. And not just happy, like happy, play games, but happy and that fulfilled, feel a sense of purpose. That's what some people say, what do you think of all your years at BCG? What's your greatest success out of it? And one time I had a fellow who worked for me 25, 30 years ago. He was there maybe 4 or 5 years. He said, 15 years later, so I just made CEO and I wanted to thank you because of you. Mm. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you said such and such to me and it just changed the way I thought about it. Now, it's more than just me. It was him, but that's a memory I remember. It said, wow, I said something directly honest and caring that changed the way that guy thought. He thinks it made a difference for him.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Thank you, Joe. And that to me is legitimate legacy. It's not getting your name on a building necessarily, but it's how you have in particular impacted the world and impacted other lives. And the more we're generous from the point of taking into consideration everyone else as opposed to just ourselves, I think that is the best way to accomplish that. And the ripple effects, oftentimes we'll never see the extent of the ripples from something we've done. But when you hear what you just heard, that kind of makes it all worthwhile. Yeah. Joe Davis, author of The Generous Leader, grandfather of 8, almost 9, and just a very insightful man. Thank you so much again for your time, Joe.
Thank you, Bill. This was awesome.
Thanks for tuning in. And if you like what you've heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise there is value to be gained in every one. Taking a second to rate, review, and share the show helps make us more discoverable and enables others to find out what's the point. If you'd like to learn more about Bill Ellis and his services, please visit his website, billellis.com. See you next time.